Welcome to the new Doctoral Student Consortium, or NDSC, podcast. For today's episode, we interviewed faculty members and PhD program directors, asking them what advice they would give early-stage PhD students or prospective PhD students who are attending AOM, or the Academy of Management conference, for the first time. To start with, we asked them to introduce themselves, including what school they're with and how many AOM conferences they have attended.
My name is Chris Toe. I'm in my second year as an assistant professor at Rutgers School of Management Labor Relations, and it has been my ninth AOM, I think.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. My name is Aneesh Rai. I'm almost a second-year faculty member in the Management and Organization Department at the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business. I completed my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania in 2023, and I have attended a total of 6 AOMs, though 2 of those were virtual.
Hi, I'm Emily Cox Pahnke. I'm an associate professor at the University of Washington, the Foster School of Business, and I am a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship. So my research largely focuses on collaboration, innovation outcomes, mostly set in a startup context, so private firms. So as part of that, I was trying to look at the funding of those firms. But I also have some research that looks at interorganizational collaboration between large firms, as well as communication patterns. I would say there's a lot of different things I just mentioned, but I will say one unifying theme between them all is that I use a lot of sort of networky approaches or network methods. There's a lot of considerations of how relationships affect different outcomes. So the first time I attended was right after my first year of my doctoral program. So in 2005, it was in Honolulu that year, maybe the first and only time. And I've been back every year since.
What's kind of your biggest, most important piece of advice for students as they go into their first AOM experience and how to get the most out of that?
I guess maybe my first piece of advice would be to go with your cohort or friends. And what I mean by that is essentially it's like AOM's a giant party. And when you enter a party for the first time and don't know anybody, it's incredibly awkward. It's incredibly weird. And so it's helpful to have a group of cohort mates, ideally even cohort mates who are older than you, more experienced than you, and have them kind of bring you around and show you around the social events, show you around which events to go to, which sessions to attend, because basically you're going into a big social network without any prior connections. And so having someone plug you in to certain groups already, it's an easier transition as opposed to going completely blind with no other support with you. Now that said, let's assume that you're going in just on your own, which is perfectly fine. What I would do is I would kind of accept that the first AOM might be a little bit rough, but it gets better every year. And what I mean by that is if you attend the same sessions every year, which I do recommend, you're going to run into the same people over and over and over. And so I remember my first AOM, it was incredibly awkward, right? Because again, you're going to a giant party and you don't know anybody. But by the time you're going to your third AOM or even your second AOM, you're seeing people that you're familiar with over and over. And that's kind of how you develop friends, right? You see the same people and you talk more and you become more familiar with each other. And so a second piece of advice is to attend the same PDWs over and over, because again, chances are you're probably going to see the same people. And that's, again, how you kind of build the connections over time. Last suggestion I'll say is, if you can, it might be helpful to figure out who your camp is early. What do I mean by camp? Well, I was told during my training that academia is basically just a bunch of little camps. You have your voice scholars, your status scholars, your people who study LMX or what have you. every camp comes with a different set of assumptions for your own theorizing methods, et cetera. That's useful to know for your own research. But also every camp is just filled with the same people, right? And so if you can identify the people that you want to hang out with, the people that you want to see over and over, that's going to kind of guide you to understand which sessions you should attend. And again, the more you see the same people over and over, the more fun it becomes, genuinely. Again, the first AOM might be a little bit rough because you're just meeting all strangers for the first time. But by the time you get to the second or third one, it's more fun. Yeah. So again, to summarize, let's go with the three. It's, go inside with, cohort mates and ideally people who are a little bit more experienced than you, who can plug you into their networks. Attend the same PDWs and events every year, and figure out who your camp is early. The overall idea is the first AOM may be a little bit rough, but over time it gets better when you see the same people over and over.
I would say that my biggest piece of advice is to accept the fact that AOM is massive. There's a lot going on, and it's very normal to feel overwhelmed, particularly your first time or even your first few times. So I would certainly encourage junior students, particularly first-year students, to not worry if you're feeling overwhelmed. If you have a cohort or friends who are perhaps junior PhD students at other schools, AOM can be a great time to start building community as you explore and navigate the conference together. I would also say if you're willing to take the initiative, AOM can be a particularly great time to ask your advisor or other faculty that you're working with to help introduce you to just one or two other people in the field that you admire and that you want to get to know, potentially co-author with in the future. AOM really can be a fantastic way to grow your network, to get to know other people in the field, and to get exposed to the fantastic research that everyone is doing. But it can also be a lot. So especially your first time, I would recommend just setting small, achievable goals for yourself and also cutting yourself some slack. AOM is overwhelming, and it's overwhelming for everyone, not just you.
I think my biggest piece of advice is that you should really seek out structured interaction. So there's so much to do there, and so many inspiring ideas. But at the same time, it also is kind of like the world's biggest high school reunion. So people are there and excited to see their friends. And, people aren't rude or are trying to ignore first-year doctoral students, but they're also really excited to see their friends. So I found over the years that structured interactions like doctoral consortiums, like PDWs, where you are assigned a specific role in a small group, are some of the very best ways to get to know people and actually talk to them. And I think a corollary to that is that, I remember seeing famous people my first year at the AOM, very clearly. And also, it's really hard to talk to the senior, most famous people because everyone wants to talk to them. They have like 40 years worth of friends to catch up with. However, other doctoral students and junior faculty, nobody is going to their paper sessions. Nobody's talking to them. And you actually have a chance to have real conversations with them and connect in different ways. So, feel free to edge your way up to a super famous senior person at a cocktail party. Expect a short conversation. But if you actually show up at a paper session and with some junior faculty and doctoral students presenting, they will all be delighted to talk to you and very flattered to hear their session.
Thinking of the new doctoral student consortium in particular, I know you said earlier when we were talking that you had attended your first year at AOM. What do you think is the best way to get the most out of those kind of experience? NDSC in particular and other key structured events. What's something students should make sure to do during those consortiums and sessions to get the most out of those opportunities?
Yeah, I would say show up to all of it. Be very friendly. I think, lots of people are nervous or uncertain of their place in the field. Make your name tag visible, but don't only talk to people who you feel like you recognize their name or their school or something. I think you'll find that the connections with everyone are really helpful, that everybody could be a potential friend, collaborator, reviewer, editor. And that, just because everyone's there doesn't mean everyone's equally comfortable. So if you could push yourself to kind of say hello, to connect, to invite people to a party if your school is hosting one, or, tell people, hey, let's go grab lunch, just be willing to kind of extend yourself a little bit. I think the dividends really pay off, especially when everyone else is also junior and a little uncertain of how things work.
How do you choose what sessions to prioritize? If you're looking at that schedule, what makes a session a must attend? What, especially thinking back to when you were a PhD student, what are kind of the high impact sessions for students and how do they navigate what ones are worth their time?
I was reminded of the exploration exploitation framework. I'm not a strategy person, but I'm getting callbacks to my strategy 101 courses, where it's you can basically make a choice. Do you want to explore something that's new and novel to you, or do you want to exploit what you already know and develop, let's say, deeper connections? And so it sounds like there's a trade-off between developing new connections or new ideas versus exploiting what you already know, your existing knowledge and connections. And what my gut tells me, and this is probably informed by research also, at least in the strategy space, is early on, you probably want to explore. So focus more on exploring, focus on attending sessions that you would never think about attending, just for the heck of it. Try it out. Why not? You might discover something new. You might not. And it might be, kind of at the very least, you'll learn what you're not interested in. I'll phrase it like that. And so early on, it might be helpful to explore, but as you progress throughout your doctoral career, it might be helpful to exploit a little more. And so just to make this a little more concrete, this is just an example. Let's say during your first AOM, you attend, let's say, 75% of sessions or something that's completely new outside of your research interest area, and you just want to explore, right? But as you progress throughout your career, it might be helpful next year to do only 50% exploration and then 50% exploitation. And then next year, 30% exploration, 70% exploitation, et cetera, et cetera. As an example now, admittedly, now that I'm, in my, tenure track position, and even during my late stage of my doctoral career, I kind of figured out who my camp was and who I liked talking to, who my research buddies were. And by the end of my doctoral career, I was actually choosing my sessions solely based on the people who were presenting rather than, what they were presenting on. Because I knew that, those were the people that I was interested in, and they did the type of research that I was interested in looking at. And so in summary, maybe explore early on, but then exploit as you progress throughout your career. That's for the paper sessions. For the PDWs, my general recommendation is maybe find the PDWs that repeat every year. And the reason why is, if the PDW is running every year, chances are, well, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get the same people showing up every year. And so again, in terms of developing who your scholarly community is, that's helpful, again, to see the same people over and over and over. I'm also willing to bet, I don't know if this is the case, but I'm willing to bet that the PDWs that repeat every year are probably higher quality than the one-off PDWs. Reason being, if they're repeating, then it must be useful to some degree, and they have more time to refine how useful those PDWs are. And so, again, my recommendation for the PDWs, look for the ones that have been repeating every year. It's useful to figure out who your camp is, and they might be higher quality than some of the other PDWs you go to.
How can you tell if it's a PDW that repeats every year?
One, you can ask people who are more experienced. Two, I guess you can look it up manually because you can look up past AOMs. And three, it is sometimes in the description itself. Like, this is the 16th annual Pechakucha on behavioral ethics or something. It'll say something like that, and you'll know that, okay, this is something that's been going on for a while.
I would say that in general, there are two dimensions along which I look at sessions, and this is also based on advice I've received from other people during my PhD program, as well as faculty members, is that you look at the topic of the session and the topic of the research, but you also take a look at the speakers. So ideally, you're attending sessions for a topic that you're very interested in, or where there's a lot of overlap with your own research agenda. And hopefully you're attending talks given by speakers that you really admire, that you're trying to get to know, or that you've heard give really good presentations. Ideally, if you can cross both of those checkboxes, that's terrific. However, it might be worth going to a mix of both some sessions where you know for a fact that you're very interested in the topic, and some sessions where maybe the topic is a little bit outside of your wheelhouse, but you've heard fantastic things about the speaker or a couple of the speakers. And that can also be a good way to kind of broaden your horizons from a research perspective. And I would especially say your first couple of times, don't hesitate to ask your friends in your program, at other programs, ask your advisor, ask faculty members which sessions they're going to. And those might also be ones that you should consider attending. I would say that my first AOM, I largely decided which sessions to attend just by myself. In retrospect, I don't think that was optimal. And then from then on, I would kind of ask more senior PhD students and faculty members which sessions they would be attending, use that to inform my choices. And I realized that that really helped enrich my AOM experience the first few times.
Thinking of the different types of sessions, have you gone to any of the kind of consortiums that they have for the various stages of your career, or to any particular PDWs that happen every year that you love? Are there any sessions like that beyond the paper sessions that you are a big champion of, or any that you think students should consider?
So in terms of consortia, I did attend the OB Doctoral Student Consortia the year that I was on the job market. I think that that is definitely something worth considering for advanced PhD students and those who are kind of near or going on the job market. It's a great way to get advice from people who have navigated that experience, and also just to meet a lot of people who are going to be on the market with you and kind of get to know the network that is going to be entering all of these different institutions at the same time as you. I do know that there are also consortia targeted towards doctoral students in the earlier stages of their PhD careers. Unfortunately, I haven't attended those, though I have heard great things about them. Apart from that, my focus is largely on attending paper sessions. I do think attending more PDWs is probably something on my to-do list in the coming years. But in years past, I've largely kind of focused on attending paper sessions, really just kind of targeting based on research topics that I know are of interest to me or overlapping with my current research agenda, as well as using it as a chance to attend talks given by speakers that I really admire and people that I'm trying to get to know. However, I do have friends who do swear by certain PDWs, so I do think that is something worth considering, just not something where I have a ton of expertise.
Are there any types of sessions beyond paper sessions that you find really valuable? Anything that the DIGS or the main AOM puts on, they're like, I always make time to go to these sessions?
I will try to stop by a friend's session sometimes just to support, people that are presenting something. I also often find the conversations in symposiums where it's like several people that have published in the area talking about ideas interesting, right? They kind of can help spur ideas, and it kind of helps you see where the frontier of a particular discussion or set of research is at.
In addition to there being a lot of sessions to choose from as a first-time AOM attendee, there are a lot of socials to choose from, ones that are for specific to DIGS, but also all the ones specific to schools. How do you decide which ones to go to? How many should you be going to as a student? How do you navigate socials, especially since so many academics are introverts?
It's incredible. You'll notice at the end of AOM, there's a considerable difference in energy at the socials and just at AOM in general.
Yes.
People are a lot more tired at the end. I'm telling you, AOM's a giant long party. It really is. The secret is to take naps also. I'll throw that in there. See if you can plug that in. I honestly take time to take naps, especially before going out. It's good advice. I'll throw in a quick joke in there. Go to the BYU ice cream social whenever possible, because ice cream is great. I stopped going because when you figure out who your network is, you meet with them outside of the socials, because the socials are there as a common staging ground for everyone to kind of just gather and then just hang out. Again, as you progress through your AOM, you figure out who your people are and who are the people you like hanging out with. And then you just find time to hang out outside of the socials. Um, as I said, I think I've progressively stopped going to the socials over time. But again, it's part of developing your community, if you will. Your advisor knows your camp. And so let's just say you're a networks person. They know which socials to go to if you want to go hang out with networks people and then just chat with them, right? So yes, asking your advisor is a good strategy. You're right. There's all these different divisions, all these different school socials, and I can't really speak to every single one. Like it would be weird for me to say, oh yeah, go to the NYU one because that's where, these people are going to be. It's it's really figuring out again which community you want to be part of and then understanding which socials they attend because that's the ones where, you get to hang out with them basically.
So I will say that attending socials at AOM is definitely an experience that was warped for me a little bit just because of the timing of the pandemic and when AOM went virtual. So my first one or two AOMs where it can feel kind of relatively lower stakes when you're further away from the job market. Uh, at that time, I was essentially deciding which socials to go to based on friends in my cohort who are more advanced PhD students, as well as friends who are PhD students at other schools. What you essentially find, especially after you've been in the field for a few years and you've been attending the conference circuit for a few years, is that you sort of figure out who your crew is. And essentially, part of the joy of AOM is using it as a chance to reconnect with your community. And so the socials can also be a great way to kind of catch up with those people. However, you do bring up a great point. It is also, as with many things at AOM, a great chance to try to expand and grow your network. I would say that particularly my first time, my advisor was particularly helpful. I would kind of decide which socials to go to based on her advice and the ones that I knew that she would be attending, because also once I was at those socials, if there was someone I particularly wanted to meet, she would make an effort to introduce me to that person. So I guess my advice for first time attendees or even just second or maybe even third time attendees is to not hesitate to ask those you are close to, whether PhD students or faculty members, to help make those introductions for you, because that can be a lot easier than just walking up to someone and introducing yourself. Now, if you have the confidence to do that, I admire and applaud you. I certainly didn't as a first year PhD student, so I was largely relying on my network to help make those introductions for me. The middle portion of my PhD was kind of when everything went virtual, and that was a very, let's say, unique experience that hopefully we won't have to experience again. And then when I came back, it was essentially time to think about it from the perspective of the job market. So again, that was a very different consideration that I would say that early attendees don't have to worry about. But kind of circling back to my early advice, I would say to set small goals, particularly for your first time. And then if you feel comfortable going above and beyond that, feel free to challenge yourself. So part of your question was, how many socials should you be attending? I would say the right answer is entirely up to you. It's going to depend on your social battery. It's going to depend on how much energy you feel you have after, as you said, attending a full day of sessions. I don't think there is a single right or wrong answer. It may also vary across the days of AOM. I would say set a target that you think feels achievable to you, where you think you will be able to get out there, make some connections. And then if you find that you have the energy to maybe attend an additional social event, feel free to go for it.
Is there anything you wish you'd known beforehand?
I think AOM in particular is a conference where it can be beneficial to make a plan before you end up at the conference itself. I think particularly my first few times, I thought that I would be able to figure out which sessions I'd be going to, which social events I'd be going to, et cetera, largely once I'd arrived in the city where the conference was happening. And in retrospect, that was not a great decision because it can be very overwhelming and kind of feel like you've been thrown into the middle of a marathon. And so I highly recommend taking some time to map out which sessions you're going to be attending, thinking about the relative plan of how you're going to be spending each day. If there are people you plan on getting lunch and dinner with, trying to schedule that beforehand. AOM is very overwhelming and it can be very frenetic once you're there and very difficult as a result to make spur of the moment plans. It still happens, it's just hectic and unpredictable. And so, depending on your preferences, I learned, especially after my first couple of times, that works better for me is to approach AOM already having a plan. And I suspect there are probably at least some students out there for whom that's going to be a good strategy as well.
How do you decide what to do with your time throughout AOM? How do you choose how many sessions to go to and what ones, and how to balance that with networking? Do you network within AOM sessions themselves primarily, or things like going to lunches? Kind of how do you structure your trip?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of evolves over time. So, at AOM now, I spend a lot of time meeting with co-authors that I don't see in person any other time of the year. And we actually try to get some work done. But I think early on, it's important to really get excited about ideas. And so going, I think, to any paper sessions that you can that are relevant to, or you think might be relevant to the research you're starting to do is a really good idea. Over the years, paper sessions become decreasingly well attended. And that's an amazing opportunity for networking, right? Like I've been to many sessions where it's only the presenters and the co-authors there, maybe a bunch of the people, which means that you can actually get to know the people and talk to them about their ideas. So, I think that the consortiums and the professional development workshops, symposiums, the first few days are really great to get big ideas and excited to see, you get really excited about the conversations that are happening. However, often those bigger events are really hard to network, again, just because people are, sort of seeing someone in the audience they're friends with, haven't talked to for a couple of years, and they're excited to say hi to them. Again, not excited to say hi to someone they don't know, but it's just a different thing. So, there are so many spaces at AOM where there's not a lot of people, and those are great chances to talk. So I would really highly recommend going through the program, doing keyword searches for topics that you're interested in, whether that's a theory or a phenomenon or, an analytical approach, and trying to make sure you're going to a bunch of different ones, different locations. And then I'd also say, I think there's a temptation to kind of like duck in and out, and, it can throw presenters. So I think that people do appreciate people that come to the session and stick around and chat with them. So consider that.
Is there anything else that you do ahead of time to prepare for AOM, or any advice for students on stuff that they should be doing before they go?
Yeah, that's an important question to think about. I also think that it is worthwhile sort of practicing talking about yourself, just very briefly, saying, hi, I'm Emily. I'm first year at this program. I'm working with so-and-so. And right now, I'm exploring ideas, but I'm sort of gravitating towards a couple of things. Right? Just making it easy for people to find connections and ways to connect. And, looking back at the things you've read the last year or two. And, so when you do meet someone, being like, oh, hey, I just read your paper, blah, blah, blah. I will say that famous people probably appreciate that. But, if you've read a junior person's work and you say that, it'll be especially a bright moment for them. So getting a little bit comfortable giving a very, very brief elevator pitch about what you're into would be great.
What do you carry with you to AOM? Thinking more along the lines of, if you're going to these sessions, are you bringing your laptop or just a notebook? What do you carry with you throughout the conference?
Yeah, well, I tend to use a very small laptop, so I'll often have it with me because I'm typically like running between co-author meetings or something. But I might have a very small bag that it's in. I have found one of the best Christmas gifts my husband ever gave me was a fast charger for my phone, so it only takes like half an hour to fully charge it. I have found I've made many a friend with people wanting to mooch off of that, which is great. You can just pull it out of a session, let them charge quickly. just because you're going to be running around checking the maps constantly. So having a charger that's small and fast with you is pretty useful. I also, I'll usually have like a small pack of Tylenol and a Band-Aid or two, maybe a safety pin. And then, I usually bring some kind of water bottle, just my preference to use a reusable one. So yeah. And then I really do try to find clothes that I won't be too hot walking around in, and shoes that can go the distance. And because depending, especially as a student, I tended to stay in hotels that were much further out to save money. And so there wasn't like an opportunity to go home during the day, obviously. So, or back to my hotel room during the day. So kind of be out and about for 12 to 15 hours. I will say, you do need something to take notes on. And I don't think a phone is ideal just because people don't think you're taking notes on it. Even if you truly are, you look like you're not paying attention. So I think a notebook always sort of signals to people that you're listening and paying attention. And, it may be subtle, but I do think it kind of endears presenters to you if they think you're really attending to what they say.
It may sound like a silly question, but I know it was something that I was stressed about when I attended my first AOM. What is your thoughts around what people should wear to AOM in terms of how formal is expected? How casual can you be? What kind of footwear? Because I know, especially for women, there's a pressure sometimes to wear heels. So for those who haven't been, kind of what's the tone for what they should be wearing?
Well, it's a very important question. Last year in Boston, I had like a 15-minute hike between a couple of my sessions. So, it's actually a really important question. And it's when I had my first year. I had just, right before I started my PhD program, I worked for Gap in their corporate offices doing some planning stuff. So clothes were on my mind a lot. And I asked, and my advisors were nice, but kind of laughed. They were women, but they were sort of not interested in clothes very much. They're just like, we don't know. So I will tell you, over the years, I've kind of figured it out. So I will say dress for weather, but bring a light sweater if you get cold. So it's going to be hot and sweaty. Most places AOM are these days. You should wear shoes that you're comfortable walking 1 to 2 miles in, no problem, and try to break them in advance. I personally think that most of us are more comfortable in social settings if we feel that we are not underdressed. I think dressing up a little bit, I think for men, it's fairly easy. You need to put on collared shirts, dress pants. But women, it is much more difficult. And so, this is probably going beyond the scope of this, but I always find personally that if I have an outfit that I feel comfortable in, that I feel like I look, that is comfortable to wear and that I look professional in, that is really helpful in terms of just kind of being able to like set it and forget it, walk out the door and not be like tugging at things or over, too hot or too cold. And then finding some shoes. I have broken one of my feet many times. And so I can't really wear heels. Not really. I can't wear heels. So, finding what shoes work for you, I think is important, and recognizing that other people don't spend a lot of time thinking about what you're wearing. However, thinking about like, okay, how do I look professional, or how do I convey that I'm not just like some random +1 at this conference, or I look like I might be, a professor, is helpful. I will also say that, as a doctoral student, like money was always really tight, but I feel like today there's so many great options with like, I think workwear is like, because people working from home more, you can find really great professional outfits on like Poshmark and the Real for like a fraction of the cost of what they used to be. So, or if they were full price. So those are sort of my like maybe TMI tips on dressing for AOM. I will also say that like, I still to this day carry a couple of Tylenol and a Band-Aid or two would be in my bag at AOM. And even if I don't need them anymore, I've found many colleagues of all genders are very grateful for them. And then also, I'm a West Coast person. And so like, I don't think pantyhose should enter the picture in a hot summer. That's definitely like a coastal thing there, and I think that, you can sort of figure out within bounds. I don't think you have to be formal, but, I think probably a little more formal than what you'd wear to a barbecue at school would be better. So
do you wear suits to AOM? What's kind of the unofficial dress code? How casual can a student dress?
This is definitely something I remember asking people about my first time. And I don't recall who gave me this advice, but it kind of stuck with me throughout, is if you wear a suit, people are going to assume that you're on the job market. Now, I don't know the extent to which that's true. I suspect it's probably true, at least for a sizable portion of the community. And so, assuming that you don't want to signal that you're on the job market until you are on the job market, it might be worth saving up wearing a full suit until you are actually looking for a job. And in the interim, I still recommend kind of dressing professionally, but it doesn't have to be quite the full 9 yards. I typically wear button-down shirts and slacks, and I'm sure that a similar business casual dress code is fairly common among most of the community. And there are some folks who like to dress up more. There are some folks who prefer to dress slightly more casually. As with many things, there's a range of acceptable answers. And I found that for myself personally, that sort of business casual attire struck the right balance of me feeling like I was dressed the way I wanted to be for a professional event while still being relatively comfortable.
Can you wear sneakers?
Yeah, that really is the $1 million question, isn't it? So I have never worn sneakers at AOM. However, I have also never really noticed if someone was wearing sneakers. All that's to say is that I am quite certain there are members of the community who attend the conference wearing sneakers. There are probably lots who decide not to. If you do decide to wear dressier shoes, I highly recommend trying to break them in beforehand, particularly if you know the conference is going to be at a location with a lot of walking. And if you do have dressier sneakers, I'm sure that there will be people wearing those as well. Again, it's going to depend on the context. Perhaps for some of the more professional events, maybe you want to wear footwear accordingly. When you're on the job market, perhaps you want to be dressing more professionally. But you're going to see, I think one of the very cool things about AOM, given that it is such a large gathering of our community, is that you just see a huge variety in terms of research topics, in terms of the dress code that people adhere to. So I'm sure that people will be able to figure out the answer that works best for them. I personally feel more comfortable wearing some form of dress shoes. However, definitely recommend breaking them in beforehand.
Anything else you want to share with students as they start their AOM journey?
Okay, so favorite advice, it's a bit of a rehash of what I've already said. Essentially, just keep going. The first AOM is going to feel a little bit rough because again, you're going to an event where you know basically nobody, and it's awkward for the most part. But over time, if you keep going to the same events and if you keep showing up to AOM, you'll see the same people over and over. And over time, it does genuinely get more fun because the people make it fun. You get to catch up with friends, catch up with people you haven't chatted with in a while, and it's kind of fun to hang out with people. And if I had some other kind of favorite advice, it's to go in with your cohort mates. Again, ideally, maybe someone who's a little bit more experienced than you to help guide you around. But again, going in with other people is much better than going in completely alone. Nothing wrong with going in alone, right? There are strategies and kind of tips to make it easier and more fun over time. But again, for the first one, I would recommend hanging out with your cohort mates and ideally someone who's a little bit more experienced than you. Go to the consortiums. They are designed for people who are in a similar stage as you, and you can go meet the people who are going through the similar process as you. You can commiserate together. You can talk with each other. Do whatever you need to do as a doctoral student, and it's absolutely go to the consortiums. If there are local doctoral student conferences, go to those. For example, in the New York City area, there is the East Coast Doctoral Conference, I think is what it's called, where they just gather as many students as they can from the East Coast, and they kind of just show up for 1 or 2 days, and they present some research, and they hang out with each other, get to know each other. Again, it's the similar stage students, and to the best of my knowledge, there's no faculty allowed, which, yeah, if there are other local doctoral conferences specifically for doctoral students, do attend those because that makes your future AOMs and future conferences easier also. In the East Coast, there's the East Coast Doctoral Conference. There's also the Transatlantic Doctoral Conference, which was one of my favorites, hosted by LBS. I'll give a shout out to that, I guess. I think in the West Coast, they host the conference at Berkeley, kind of gathering schools among the West Coast. And I think there's something in the Texas area also. Overall point being, if you can find some kind of doctoral conference, do attend those because, again, it makes your AOMs easier also. You're just seeing the same people over and over.
I think just one point that I'll double click on in response to the question that you asked about attending social events and how I said that you should decide the number of social events depending on what feels right for you, and then, challenge that choice. Try to kind of challenge yourself to maybe go to more and more every year to kind of build up your capacity so you can go to more events and meet more people. I actually think that that's probably a pretty good strategy for the conference in general. I do think that, again, especially my first time, I was trying to attend everything that I possibly could. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed between the sessions, the panels, the symposia, the PDWs, the social events. And so, again, depending on your preferences, depending on what style works better for you, it might be worth considering attending slightly fewer events, but then ensuring that you can bring your full energy to each one that you do go to. I think that that is something that I should have considered maybe my first one or two AOMs. So I think that's just something for folks to keep in mind. Maybe at the end of the first or the second day, if you think that you're feeling so overwhelmed that you're not being able to fully engage in the events that you're attending, maybe try changing it up, going to one or two fewer events the next day and seeing if that allows you to bring your full self to the events that you are attending.
So I can tell you a couple things that a couple things that I didn't realize up front that I think are useful to know. So the first is always assume that someone is more senior and famous, even if they're not. I remember one time I saw my advisor talking to someone who I assumed was a doctoral student from their school. So I was like, "Oh, what year are you in?" And my advisor's like, "She's a full professor at this big university." I was like, oh, I just felt dumb. So you just always say how long have you been in school? But assume that they're somehow senior and you should know who they are. At least for me, that's less awkward to be corrected and say, "Oh, actually, I'm a doctoral student," than, "Oh, actually, I'm a full professor," right? So, and then I think the other thing that's small, but the other thing is just remember that the great thing about this field is that you're going to be in it for many decades and you're going to see people for many decades and you just never really know who you're going to connect with, how and when. And so people that I met in passing years ago, now I coordinate conferences with or have given me opportunities to, give talks at their schools or have ended up being editors or reviewers on papers. And so, your research is really important. But I think we forget that our research is socially embedded and, the feedback that you're getting from people is so important and the connections you're making. You just never know how that's going to come back in a few years. So, I think probably everyone gets it, but be really professional. And then one thing I think that is really valuable is just following up. So if you do get assigned a mentor at a consortium or someone that reads your paper at a professional development workshop, I think it's great to follow up a few days after, a week after AOM, just thank people. I think that kind of helps cement that connection. And, your friends, it's hard to predict right now who your good friends in the field are going to be. But all these little interactions at conferences and things, they kind of add up over time. And, hopefully you'll find yourself as excited as most of us are to go to conferences after many years in the field when it's really great because you hear about cool ideas, but also you get to see friends and catch up. Which is really what I think makes a lot of conferences the most fun to attend.
Thanks so much for your time and for all the advice you've shared for our PhD students as they prepare for their first ever AOM. That's very helpful and I appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on. And I hope that this advice is helpful for people. And yes, I hope that everyone enjoys their first AOM and all AOMs after.
Yeah, well, and I will say I still have friends from the new doctoral student consortium. So, you just never know. But yeah.
That's fantastic.
Totally.